Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Comix Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club for our March book, which is One Trick Pony by Nathan Hale. Yay! Yay, right, guys? Yay! Okay. That was not much of a yay. I'm Brian Hibbs, your host, and we are here with Ben. Ben, my son, who is our co-host. Yay!
Yay.
And then we have kids here. We don't have as many kids as we normally do because I think it's because it's spring break. Normally we have a full house, but spring break. And then on our other end we have Nathan there himself, whose camera does not work. But will be doing live drawing for us, so that might be even more entertaining. As he shows us how a bill becomes a law. So hi, Nathan.
Hello, hello.
How you doing?
I am doing great. Happy spring break, everybody. Is spring break just starting, or is it coming to an end?
Just ending.
Just ending. Gotcha.
Just ending. Yeah. Oh, there's just starting. Okay, so depends what school you go to.
All right.
Whatever. It's all good, Ben. Gosh. Hey, and also I want to pass this around to you guys. I have an early of One Trick Pony that doesn't have any color in it, and it's got like his original sketch drawings in it, so it's pretty cool. So you guys can just sort of pass that around and look at it, and yeah, it's kind of neat. I really like watching the process of
oh, excellent.
Yeah. What, Ben, you want to say something?
No.
What?
No, I nothing.
Nothing.
I don't
Okay.
know. Just
Great. All right, Nathan. So let's start. Let's start from the beginning.
All right.
Comics.
Yes.
Comics and you. What do you? Tell me why you like comics. What's about them? When did you start reading comics?
So I am a very interesting story to the world of comics. I did not read many comics other than newspaper comics growing up. I was a diehard newspaper fan. You guys might not believe this, but every day a kid on a bike came to my house and gave me a big giant sheet of comics. And I'd read those every day. I even read the super boring ones, you got Family Circus down here and Far Side right here, and then like the really weird ones like Mary Worth. Alley Oop, which was a caveman one. I don't even know if it was supposed to be funny, but I read it anyway. I read all of these every day. Die-hard newspaper fan. I also really enjoyed political cartoons. Right? So my parents were kind of apolitical. They were kind of weird. They didn't know. They weren't pro one party or the other, but I would always read these political cartoons because there would be like a donkey and an elephant, and they'd be talking to each other, and like the Grim Reaper would be standing by with a big giant sickle and stuff. And this stuff was incredibly cool to me. That is the kind of thing that I read every day. I did not read your superhero comics growing up. I was a diehard reader, but I only read kind of big science fiction fantasy novels. That was really popular in my house. My dad told me, when you go to the library, look on the spines of the books, because on the bottom of the spines of the books, you will see a little planet or a little unicorn head, and that means sci-fi or fantasy, and you can just don't even worry about any of the other books there. Just focus on these ones. And so I read a lot of that. So I read a lot of newspaper comics and a lot of science fiction, fantasy novels. I didn't get into proper comics reading until I was in college. When I was in college, I lived in Seattle, Washington, and they had a lot of great underground comic stores, and I would go in there, and I would go, what are these? These have amazing drawings, and I would check out a lot of weird underground comics. So that is my start. I didn't start making comics until I was after 30 years old. I made a lot of picture books. I wanted to be a picture book author. So I made all kinds of incredibly unsuccessful picture books. But I ran into an author friend of mine. She wanted to do, she thought my comics looked like, she thought my picture books looked like comics. She said, we should do a comic together. And I was like, not that interested in doing that. But just out of curiosity, what's your comic on? She said, I want to do Rapunzel, but I want to do it as a story in the Wild West. And I said, that sounds amazing. And I jumped in with both feet. It took me over a year. It was a horrible, terrifying experience to learn comics on the fly. But I actually discovered that it's my favorite type of drawing. It's my favorite kind of thing to do. Since then, I'm now working on my 9th graphic novel. So yeah, long story long. That is how I got my start in comics.
So when you were at school, were you studying illustration?
Illustration student. I wanted to do book covers. You know those big science fiction books that I read? I wanted to do the covers for those books. And I also wanted to do picture books with kind of a science fiction fantasy element to it. So yeah, I went to school to learn acrylic painting, oil painting, watercolor, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I jumped from there. Are these drawings coming up on your screen, or is this all
Yeah, no, they're
through?
all coming up on the screen. Yeah, no, this
Oh,
is it's actually really entertaining to watch it, the live animation happening.
Yeah. All right. That's much better than my face.
What you're best known for prior to One Trick Pony, which was a great book, but what you're known for are the Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales.
Yes.
Which are historical books.
Right.
If you guys haven't read any of these Hazardous Tales, these are fantastic books. We've got a number of them up front. You read them too? Yeah, they're great, aren't they? Like they teach you stuff and they're really funny at the same time. Yeah, exactly. Why history? Was that also a thing that you loved, or?
I'm the world's most accidental historian. I'll tell you how it started. I was doing Rapunzel's Revenge, which was a book not for a comics publisher, but for a children's book publisher called Bloomsbury. It was a Western where Rapunzel was going around and whipping people and lassoing people with her long braids, right? It took place in the Old West. And I thought, you know what? I want to make sure that my Old West is authentic. So, I mean, I know it's a fairy tale and she's going to battle giants and pixies and, things like that. But I want to make sure that all of the rifles and all of the pistols and all of those kinds of things are authentic. I don't want to just make this stuff up. It'll have a lot more resonance if it looks right. So I started looking at all kinds of, cowboy hats and guns and boots and old Western towns and all that stuff. And I got more and more fascinated with all of this stuff and what it looked like. And I felt like, the story behind why boots are shaped like this, I hate to say it, but it might be more interesting than a fairy tale. So I got really just soaked in all of the visual reference, and it was so much fun that I started doing little mini comics online, just about little things. I did a little story about Lewis and Clark and a little story about this and that. And the mini comics didn't get to a lot of people. I was not a very successful web comic person, but the one person they did get to was the art director over at Abrams Books, and that was the right person to see them because he saw these history comics and he said, you know what? This could be a series right here. And he bought basically all of these on the strength of a handful of web comics. There are 6 in the series. The first one is about the Revolutionary War, then we got the Civil War, then the Donner Party, World War I, the Underground Railroad. The newest one is the Alamo, and right now I am working on book number 7. In fact, it's due May 13th, and I got so many pages to do. You wouldn't even believe it. This is a World War II story, and I'm in a crunch for it right now, so I've actually got a couple of pages that I'm working on from it. Let's see if I can pull up one. Here we go. So yeah, this is a World War II story about a bombing raid that went to Tokyo way back in early 1942. Here you can see our B-25 bombers. They're sitting up in their plane. Now, when I talk about reference, this has been the story of my life right now because I have to know what these planes look like. That's a nice simplified cartoon version of a B-25. See how it's got those weird twin fins on the back there and the turret gun right here and the propellers and the front thing. That's all, pretty easy to find reference for that. But then I have to find out what the interior look like and what the clothes look like and what the seat belts look like and all of this stuff. So I have to carefully, a lot of old movies take place in these planes. So I watch a lot of old movies and then freeze it on a frame where everybody's talking to each other so I can see what is making up the interior of this plane. I have to look at instruction manuals for the pilots, all of that stuff in order to draw out each and every little scene. You can see how the gunner sits up in the nose of this thing. He's also the guy that drops the bombs. So I've just been drawing this plane and these crews nonstop. This is early on in the book when they're out on a submarine patrol and they spot something that looks like a submarine, but then they say, it's a dead whale. And then they say, well, maybe it's a trick. Maybe it's a submarine dressed up to look like a dead whale. Better safe for sorry, aim for the whale carcass. And I get to draw a whale carcass blowing up, which is something I'm pretty excited about. I think that's probably a pretty good sound effect for a whale carcass blown, right? You know, plume, you know, and then, let's see. And then I also get to draw the aftermath right there. This is good stuff. You know, it's hard to get to draw an exploded whale carcass in a picture book or, you know, a fantasy story, but boy, you go into real history and you can find all kinds of fun stuff. Also, this whole thing took place on Christmas Eve. So this pilot, Captain Greening, says that's the strangest Christmas Eve I've ever had. But these guys are out training in day after day to do this mission in the Pacific. This is what you can see. This is a finished page. Boy, I wish they all looked like this, because right now I'm on pages that look more like this, and I've got to go in and color them. So once again, just tons of research. This is this spread shows the Japanese army as it is crunching across the Pacific and just destroying everything in its path. This is where comics, I think, are perfect for explaining things. You can see all these tiny dots and things on here. I actually got to go in and draw all 350 of the Japanese aircraft, right? This Indian Ocean raid in 1942, and of course the 100+ American aircraft, the 7 destroyers right here, the 3 carriers, and then of course I also get to draw who got destroyed and what got sunk. Here's the crazy thing: down here on the bottom, you can see the Allied losses, all of the things that these guys lost over here. Guess how many things the Japanese lost? 0! Can you believe that? Look at that. All of those things. Pretty cool stuff. So yeah, I'm hard at work on this series. It's just, I'm drawing probably close to 16 hours a day right now, and I will be for the next 40 days in order to finish this series. But this series has been a lot of fun. And it's been, it didn't start as a very successful series, but as it's continued to come out, it's grown and grown, gotten more and more popular. And this year I was very excited because I finally got to have a lifelong dream achievement, which was I got to be in the Scholastic Book Fair. You can now get a couple of books from the Hazardous Tales comics series in the Scholastic Book Fair, which I'm pretty excited about. So it was my publisher was not super happy when I told them I want to take a break from this series and do a robot horse story. This is what they look like. They were like, what? I said, please, I'm so tired of all this visual research. I want to do a story where I don't have to look at 10 million things to draw stuff. I was kind of coming around full circle. That fairy tale story, Rapunzel, I wanted to do something a little more realistic where I could look at cool reference and draw that stuff. Now I'm totally the other end of the spectrum. I'm like, please don't make me look up any B-25 airplanes or Japanese, you know, any of that stuff. I want to do a science fiction book. So that's where I am now. Yeah.
I want to ask you at least one more question about the history, though, because you know you said that you came to this late.
Yes.
And I'm curious where the history comes from. Are you researching stories that you already have interest in, or are you just sort of generally looking at history and going, oh well, that sounds like a really cool story, I can illustrate it? If you see the difference there.
Yeah. So when I first started the series, it was going to be about obscure, lesser-known American history characters. I've always been interested in the spy Nathan Hale, who's a Revolutionary War spy who was captured and executed by the British. Small story. He's only famous because of his last words. He said, I regret that I have but one life to give for my country, and then they hanged him. And that was it for Nathan Hale. But I've always been interested in him, and I thought, you know what, it'd be cool to just do a little comic on that guy. And that was the first book, and that kind of set the table for it. The second book was another super obscure thing. It was where 2 ironclad ships from the Civil War. This was the first time iron-covered ships ever battled each other. And it's usually when you hear about the Civil War, you're hearing about all the big land battles and, you know, horses and cavalry charges and stuff. You never hear about Navy battles. And this battle is just a weird thing. It's almost like a Cold War type of situation where inventors from the South are racing against inventors from the North to invent this new type of war machine. So I did another kind of obscure history story about the Monitor and the Merrimack. Not something that everybody knows. You know, historians, of course, know this stuff. But as the series got more and more popular, the people now want to see bigger stories that they're a little more familiar with. I always try to pull it back to the slightly more obscure, but you know, when people want a comic about the Donner Party, it's really hard not to give them a comic about the Donner Party, because that is a fascinating story. People know the broad strokes of it, but they don't know all the little details and how they got trapped in that situation. And so, you know, stories about the Underground Railroad. Basically, since the series is called Hazardous Tales, I look for stories that have an element of danger or gruesomeness or just horrible things that would happen. And I'm always on the lookout. I do a lot of school visits where I go to schools and talk to kids, tell wacky stories and draw on the screen like I'm doing right now. And whenever we do Q&A at the end, all the kids are always like raising their hands, and it stops being Q&A and it just immediately comes, hey, are you going to do a book about the Titanic? Are you going to do a book about the World War II? So I've got a list of subjects that I'll probably never exhaust in the Hazardous Tales series, because there's just so much interesting stuff. And I've found that almost every historical event or story that you hear about, if you start digging into it, it gets crazy and weird and funny and unexpected. So really, just anything, as long as it's dangerous and, you know, has cool things like exploding whales and stuff. You know. And that's a true story. They did bomb that whale on Christmas Eve.
Is all your art done digitally, or do you do some of it by hand?
It is all done by hand digitally. Does that make any sense?
Oh.
Yep. So what I'm drawing on right now is a Cintiq screen, right? It's like a big iPad, and I lean over it and I draw with a big pen, right? And it's a pen. It's just like a pen, but I'm just drawing right here on the screen. I don't use any Photoshop tricks or you know, there's no, everything that's drawn on here is drawn the same way I draw it with ink. You got to draw 2 eyes and a mouth and some hair and some ears. So here's the thing. And this my first 2 books, Rapunzel's Revenge and Calamity Jack, I talked about those ones. Those were all hand inked on paper. Carefully inked out on paper. These books took me, each one took about a year, 12 months to finish one of these books. They were colored digitally. I had plans to go in and watercolor them like a big European comic, so that the whole thing would just look like this great like storybook feel to it. But it was just going to be too slow of a process. It was going to be too tricky. I didn't want to risk the inks. You know, if you spend 3 days inking a page and then go into watercolor it and you knock the water over, you've just wasted 3 days and you got to start over again. So I started coloring digitally. When I jumped into the history books, the Hazardous Tales books, I was so used to coloring digitally that I thought, you know what, these are web comics, these started digitally, so I'm going to draw on here. I'm going to draw them digitally. And I tell you what, I love inking by hand. It's great. I love traditional artwork. If I had my choice, I would do traditional artwork all day and all night. But here's the thing about making a good comics page. It's got to flow nicely, right? It's got to read here and then pop to here, and then something cool happens here, and then there's a little joke or thing right here, and you just want the whole thing to just be so easy and nice to read. And what that takes is a lot of rearranging. So I'll get all of my drawing and lettering down, and I'll be like, you know what? I love what's happening here, but I wish it was happening here instead. So now, because I'm working digitally, I can just cut this, put it down here, and just scoot it around. So that's my main thing that I use digital for, scooting, because I want that information to read. So everything just gets scooted all over the place. By the time one of these pages gets to this point, I've shifted everything around 10, 11 times to make sure that the flow works, the jokes work, everything sets. It's like editing a movie or something. I just want everything to work well, so yeah, it's all digital. That's the answer you're looking for. Yes.
You got a follow up? No? All right. I'll start asking questions from you guys, so you guys start thinking about your questions too in a minute here. So you said that it took you 12 months to do Rapunzel's Revenge.
Yes.
How long does it take you to do a Hazardous Tale book?
I'm getting faster and faster. And this current book, this World War II book, which, as you saw, looks like this, I will probably be completing in the drawing. So here, let me back up just a tiny bit. I'll walk you through all of this. So what I do is I pitch to the publisher a handful of ideas for the next Hazardous Tales book, right? Once I pitched him like 10 ideas, right? I'm like, I want to do about this guy, and I want to do about this, and maybe the Underground Railroad, or maybe this, or maybe that, or maybe this. And this just stumped them. They did not know what to think about this. They were just like, and they were stuck in this mode for like 10 months. I could have done a book in this time that they took them to choose it. They finally chose one. This is when we did the Underground Railroad story, the Underground Abductor. But it took too long. So now when I send them an idea, I'll send them about 3. Say, okay, this is what I want to do. And I'll lay out these 3 different ideas. Every once in a while, my editor will come forward and say, hey, I know what we should do. And she will pitch me an idea. And I'll think about that. I'll put that on the list. For example, she just, last year when we were talking about book number 8, she said, you're crazy if you don't do Hamilton. Right? And I said, well, I don't want to do like a cash in on Hamilton. Hamilton's going to be so tired by the time 2019 rolls around. Nobody's going to want that anymore. So anyway, we pitch all of these ideas. Once we finally settle on one, for example, this World War II bombing raid. Say, okay, this is the one we're doing. World War II bombing raid. So first things first, I don't draw anything. I'm not going to draw a single thing. This stage is the research stage. I have to read all the books on this subject matter. Books on bombers, books on the Pacific, books on Pearl Harbor, books on the Japanese, books on the admirals, all of that stuff. I've got to do all of this reading. I'm not drawing anything. I'm just reading, right? Because I don't know about this stuff. I'm not a historian. I'm a cartoonist. I'm an illustrator. I don't know any of this stuff. So I'm reading this stuff, and it's just blowing my mind. I'm like, oh, I didn't know about this. This is crazy. So I have to read all of this stuff. I mark up all of these books, and I put together about a 70-page manuscript, right? This is written like a screenplay. You know, the hangman says, what's that? And Nathan Hale says, oh, it's an airplane, blah, blah, blah. So I write all of this stuff down till the manuscript is complete. Still no drawing. I send this off to my editor. She goes in and story edits everything. She's like, you know what? This chapter doesn't seem to have anything to do with the other. Why don't we cut this? And I'd like a little bit more explanation of this because I don't understand that. This is just story editing. She's not a historian. Then it goes to the copy editor, who proofreads everything, goes and corrects all my spelling and that kind of stuff. Then it goes to the fact checker. The fact checker is not a nice man. He's got a mustache, right? He goes through and he's just like, where did you get this idea? This is terrible. He writes little snarky little comments like, oh, really? Nice research there, buddy. And they go in and they just hammer this thing. I get it back. I make all the corrections that they asked for, or I fight for things that I want to keep the same. And then we finally have this manuscript. This whole process right here takes about 4 months, right? Just to get the script. And then if I'm lucky, I get about 4 months to do all of the drawing and coloring and lettering. This book that I'm on right now, we ended up spending probably closer to 7 months on all of this stuff, all of the rewrites. So now I've got like 2.5 months to do a 128-page graphic novel with accurate depictions of World War II airplanes. So all told, each one of these books takes between 8 and 10 months from inception to completed artwork.
Are you juggling more than one book at a time? Are you already starting the research on the next one, or do you have to stay focused on one time period, one thing at a time?
I have to stay focused. When I was younger, I used to think I'm a master of multitasking. I can do 3 things at once. And the longer I do comics, the more I realize that I just have to immerse myself in that book, even to the point where like I won't listen to audiobooks or movies or things that will take me out of that concentration zone of just getting. So I just live in it, and it's like cramming for a test the entire time. And then when I move on to the next book, I completely forget every single thing that I was working on. So now we're talking about. You guys are sitting there going, yeah, let's talk about One Trick Pony. That was 3 months ago. I'm totally done with that. Now it's all World War II. But yeah, it's just pure focus. And fortunately, I'm able to do this full time. So when I'm kind of in the drawing and comic zone, it's just nonstop. So I'm trying I'm trying to pull up I think I got my camera working. So I'm trying to pull myself up so you guys can actually see me here. Oh, no, it says camera problem again. Okay. Never mind. Keep going.
All right. Just we like the doodles. The doodles are fine. We like the doodles, right? Yeah. Do any of you guys have any questions? Yes, we have.
Well, what made you think about like doing the robotic pony and all that stuff?
Ah, there we go. All right, so switching gears. Got to stop thinking about all those World War II bomber planes. So my grandpa told us this really weird story. I had a very strange grandpa. He was a farmer. He was also a teacher. He taught on the Navajo reservation, Native American reservation, for like 40 years. And so he had this weird tradition of telling weird stories. He taught grades like K through 4, I think, at the Native American Indian reservation on the Navajo reservation in kind of the Four Corners area, northern Arizona, southern Utah, that kind of area. So anyway, whenever we'd go to Grandpa's house, we'd be going to bed. You know, here's me, I'm a little kid. We'd be like, hey, Grandpa, tell us a bedtime story. And this guy would start telling us the weirdest stories we had ever heard. Crazy stuff, right? Weird war stories. He was a Marine. He was in the Korean War, did stuff like that. But also weird stories that he had picked up on the reservation, weird stories. And so we'd just listen to my grandpa's stories and just get more and more horrified, right? One of the stories he told us was about this great pony that no matter what, when you rode this pony, if you told the pony to stop, that pony stopped, no matter what. And this story stuck with me my entire life. And I took it and I blended it with the creepy story of the Pied Piper, right? The guy who plays the flute to get rid of all of the rats, if you know that crazy fairy tale. And I thought, how could I mix these two together and then make it science fiction? Because as much as I enjoy drawing an exploded whale for history, this is not a history book. This is a fantasy book, and we just can't have some sort of crazy horse cannibalism. I think it works well with a strange science fiction-y story. So it really kind of runs the full gamut of my storytelling, my experience as somebody who enjoys stories. Because when I was a kid, before I could read, I would listen to this guy tell stories. And then I would hear my teacher read me fairy tales. And then I would read the big novels myself. So this One Trick Pony is really like a combination of all of my favorite types of storytelling, all mixed into one big, weird science fiction story.
Did that answer your question, Beck? Yeah, nice.
Are you gonna do the Hamilton one for the Hazardous Tales?
Ah, the Hamilton book. I will tell you, I am not going to do a Hamilton book. If you are interested in a Hamilton graphic novel, well, guess what? There's one coming out very soon from a guy whose last name is Hennessy. He did the history of beer. If you've seen that graphic novel, he did the history of the Constitution, where it's just the entire Constitution, but in graphic novel form. He has got a Hamilton graphic novel coming out soon. My editor was like, "You're crazy if you don't do this." I said, "Well, there's nothing left over from the musical. He covered everything. Anything I did would just be a rehash. But I do want to do another another Revolutionary War story, because if you've read my One Dead Spy, the story about Nathan Hale, you know that it ends in 1776, and we do not yet have a winner for the Revolutionary War. So I've been waiting to do Revolutionary War Part 2. So this book, which will be book number 8, is going to focus on Benedict Arnold, who was also in One Dead Spy, if you remember that. And remember, if you looked in the background, it had the biography for Benedict Arnold, but everything was redacted. And the hangman's really mad. He's like, hey, how come there's all the information's crossed out about Benedict Arnold? That is because he's going to be in this book, and he is also going to be in there with somebody who does feature in prominently in the Hamilton musical, and that is Lafayette. So it's going to be kind of a Benedict Arnold, Lafayette, Washington extravaganza, and I'm sure we'll have some cameos by our guy, Alexander Hamilton. There he is, A.H. So watch for that one. I will be going straight into that one the second this World War II book is done. It will most likely be out fall of 2017. This World War II book will be out this November. It's going to be crazy.
So it'll be 2018 for the Benedict Arnold.
Oh yes, 2018 Benedict Arnold. Oh boy. Yes.
Do we have another question in from the room? Yeah? No? No? All right, fine. Okay, so how long did it take you to do One Trick Pony? Because I assume you don't have that full process of having to research, so that's all gone. Was
Right.
it easier or harder to work without that net?
Oh, all right. You guys are going to get the full info on this one. I thought it was going to be a vacation compared to writing a history, because remember all of that research that I used to have to read? No research this time around, right? I was super excited, but guess what I had to do instead? Story editing, right? See, when I do one of these history books and I send it off to my editor, she can be like, I don't understand why these characters would do that. And I get back to her and I'm like, well, I don't understand it either, but that's what they did. It's in the history book. She's like, oh, all right. I guess that's how it's going to be then, right? Things like this happen constantly in history, just bananas things that the people do that you wouldn't expect them to do. So when I finally did a book that was just pure story, my editor, she was like, ha, 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 here she is. She's like, oh, yes. I finally get to tell your characters what to do. She's rubbing her hands together, super greedy like that. Yeah. So I sent her in my manuscript for One Trick Pony. This was long, long ago. This book's been in the work for many years. This was a huge manuscript. I wanted this to be the fattest graphic novel I've ever done. All of the Hazardous Tales books are 128 pages long. I think Rapunzel was 144. I wanted to go all the way up to like 172 or something for this book. So I wrote a monster. This was just going to be epic, right? Now, if you've read the book, you know it is about some humans dealing with some aliens, right? With the giant aliens. That's not what the aliens look like. I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't read the book yet, right? So that is not what was in the original manuscript. Oh no, it was far more complicated than that. So it was about some humans in a post-apocalyptic setting who had been enslaved by robots, right? The robots that they themselves had created. They were enslaved by robots, and the robots were enslaved by the aliens, right? I sent this to my editor. Oh, and then, into this mix, there is also a robot horse, right? The robot horse has always been the main character of this story. My editor said, what's with the robots in the middle? I was like, well, see, it's interesting because, see, the humans are slaves to the robots, but the robots are slaves to the aliens. But the humans don't even know about the aliens. The aliens are like floating in space and controlling everything like puppeteers. And my editor was like, but the humans never even get to see the aliens. They only get to see the robots. And then the robots end up fighting the aliens and the humans and the aliens. There's just no, what's with this middleman? And I clung to it. I was like, no. There's this whole thing. Because see, the aliens, the robots have created this whole religion based on what the aliens transmit down to them. And it's all very complex and has a lot to say about why people do things and religions and all kinds of crazy stuff. And she's like, yeah, it's no good. I said, well, what should I do? And she said, well, what if you just took the robots out? And I said, well, it's about a robot pony. She said, well, it can still be about a robot pony, but let's talk about who the main characters are and who the main villains are, and let's cut out the middleman. So I took this monster 172-page manuscript and I rewrote it. She said, you know what, there's still a lot of detritus. There's a lot of confusing parts in here about robots and control and all of this stuff. Simplify it. I know there's a better story hiding in these pages. So I rewrote it a third time. And this isn't like going through and like scooting sentences around. No, this was full rewrite. Starting over from scratch with the same theme and the same kind of idea and the same story. The third rewrite, at that point, I was getting desperate. I was like, she's just going to make me rewrite this thing forever. But the third rewrite just streamlined everything. Instead of it being a story that took place over a long time with confusing middle characters and all this stuff, we just got right to the point. We said, okay, once upon a time, there's a girl. She finds a robot horse and she fights some aliens. Done. Completely finished. Now, this could have been pretty interesting. In fact, this could have been an interesting thing that was like 7 books long. Would you guys have to wait 7 years? All you kids who are reading it in 5th grade would have to read the final installment of this book when you're in college, And you know what? Honestly, I don't think the payoff would have worked as well. It works better when it's just one clean, sharp story. Very similar to the story my grandpa told me when I was going to bed at night. He was telling me a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's like a fairy tale. It's all set up. It all happens. Boom, one book. So that rewrite process probably went on longer than any of the research or anything I ever did before that. I think I wrote and rewrote this book for like 18 months. While I was drawing the pictures for the Alamo book and other things like that, I was constantly writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, which gave me a whole lot of respect for what most comic authors do. I have to do tons and tons of research, but after a while you get used to research. But making a story work where the characters' motives work and the bad guys' motives work and everything meshes together, all of that happened, and I think it happens pretty well, and it happens not because of me, but because of a very smart editor. She's a great editor. Her name is Maggie. She is not a comics editor. She's a book editor. She edited a book called, let's see, Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. That's one of her books that she edited. They made a movie of that one. But she's a story editor, and she looked at this thing and she said, let's make this better. And that's hard to take when at that point I had already written like 7 or 8 graphic novels that I was proud of. It was hard to take the criticism that you have written, it's confusing and it doesn't work. But it was really satisfying to go in and cut it down, cut it down, and cut it down, and cut it down until we found what the book is today, which I think is, this is also the length of a Hazardous Tales book, 128 pages long, and I think it just works perfectly for what it's trying to do. Yeah. That is a good long explanation for that. The important thing is listen to your editors, the people, your teachers, people who are telling you can do better. Reach in deep and do better, because that's what she did for me. And I think it made the book 1,000 times better. The reviews for it have been incredibly positive so far. In fact, a lot of reviewers have pointed out how great it is that it's all contained. You want to read this story? It's all in the book. Starts, action, end. No series, no prequels, no endless volumes of it coming out, just one story.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. It was very strong, very tight. I loved it quite a bit, and I think we all did. Yeah, yeah, guys. Yeah. So the genesis of it was really long.
Mm-hmm.
What about the actual execution? Once you had gotten the editor to help you shape a story that was much smaller, was the robots and the aliens and how the other humans look and what society looks like, did that flow much faster because you didn't have to do any research, or was that also a meticulous process for you?
I'm always more interested in story than design. So I worked really carefully to get the story where I wanted it to be. And then just started thumbnailing it in. I know there's a million excellent artists out there who can just design the coolest looking creatures and characters, and they take character design courses and all things like that. And I like that too, but I want it all to be in service of the story. I want the story to just clip right along. So the characters and the aliens and everything that they look like just kind of grew out of the thumbnails as I scribbled out these little, when I first started drawing the robot pony in the story, it was just a scribble on a page, right? So I would drop in all the text so that I knew what happened on each page, and then I'd be like, okay, and the pony's here, and Strata, she's over here, and she's running this way, so all of these little scribbles like this, and then as I would go in and kind of tighten up the drawings, I'd be like, what is she wearing? What does she look like? And I think a little bit about, what would these people wear in this situation? How would their clothes communicate their lifestyle? So like these, they run into this clan of these angry guys that want to kill our main characters, and these guys are dressed up like cavemen, and they're not clean shaven because remember, the aliens are after all metals. So what would they even shave with? So they all have these shaggy beards, and their clothes aren't cut straight because they don't have any kind of metal tools. They're going back to the Stone Age. So their hands are kind of gnarled. They're riding on horses that are, just with raw leather strips and all of this stuff. All of this kind of comes from the story. And so really when I'm doing character design, what I'll do, I don't like wasting too much time drawing detailed character, because the thing I've discovered is that everything always takes way longer than it should. So So I never get a nice prep time or anything. I don't get to draw one of those cool things where you draw like the character making every single expression. You know, sometimes some cartoonists really have it together and they can do all of this cool study and a little color code of what. No. Usually when I'm like, okay, page 1, here she is. Okay, it looks like she's gonna have wavy hair. Okay, well, I got to remember what she looks like, and then we're just off to the races. So there's it's all in service of the story. I want to make sure everything is functional and there for a reason. I like crazy costumes and super far out designs and crazy things like that in a story, but I just don't want it to get in the way of the story. The drawing for this, as you can see, it's quite a bit different than the drawing for my Hazardous Tales series because I use a lot of cross-hatching. When I was first starting to get into comics, I was introduced to the French cartoonist Mobius, who does a really great kind of science fiction cross-hatching style. And I thought, wow, this is it. I want to draw like this forever. And that's how I drew. I drew like Mobius, or tried to draw like Mobius, all through college. And I haven't been able to draw in that style because I've been doing these history books where everything works a little better if it's cartoony. You know, like look at this guy on the phone. Look at his face, right? That wouldn't quite work in a story like this, but for a history story, it works better with the cartoony stuff. So I got to spend a lot more time drawing than I did. And the coloring in this book, we wanted to do really loose and really quick. And the interesting thing is if you go close into any of these panels, you can see places where I messed up on the color because the coloring went so quick. Like, for example, see right there? That's supposed to be the sky color. It's not, right? Look at this right here. See, look at this, Clyde's second ear here. Not yellow, but I wanted the emphasis and the detail to be on the pen work, the cross-hatching and the lines and the drawing. And then the colors to be kind of secondary, almost kind of a loose afterthought. You can see down here the coloring isn't super precise. It's kind of loosey-goosey because I want the line work to be what jumps out at you. But once again, just like the design, I didn't want the coloring or the drawing style to get in the way of telling the story. When people read the book, I want them to just be sucked into it. I don't want anybody to stop and go, oh, I like this coloring, or oh, look at that. You know, I just want them to be panel, panel, panel. What happens next? What happens next? You know, and just flowing through it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, Ben, I know you had some sort of comment you wanted to make about the coloring.
Oh yeah, I was just wondering how you made the choice to not color the whole thing and just to color parts of it.
Full color. So my Hazardous Tales books, which are what I'm now most used to, are all colored in this +1 style. Everything is grayscale, black and white, +1 color. My first books, Rapunzel's Revenge, Calamity Jack, they were full color. Very bright, very vivid. And I liked the way they looked, but I've really come to like the way these books look. For that same kind of storytelling, communicating reason. You're not getting lost anywhere on this page because the multicolors or this and that. I just like how clean and readable everything is when it's just black and white +1 color. I don't know if I would like these cartoony characters here if they were flesh colored. You know, I like them when they're just black and white, like newspaper comics. So to me, it's a style choice, but I think I just want to keep it simple. So do you ever get exhaustion when you're reading like a full color comic, like that's just colored to right down to its toenails? Sometimes that wears me out. I want to just be able to read and clip along, see the characters, see the expression, see the text, and not have all of my color receptors going on. I think this coloring style is probably the way I'm going to do comics for the foreseeable future, just because it's kind of become my signature style. And I just like how clean it is. Once again, it serves the story. And it's just clean. Your focus goes where you want it to. You're not getting hung up on, like, what color would I make these whale guts? That would be a hard color choice. But no, they're just gray. Nice and easy. So not only is it faster, I just think it's easier to read. But good question.
So each each of your books, though actually I don't know that I've put every single one of them next to each other, but they each have a different color palette, as I recall.
Yes, they do.
Are you choosing the color palette for the story, or at this point are you choosing colors that you haven't used before? And does this mean that you're going to get into like ultraviolets or something at some point?
So far, I'm choosing them for the story. In One Trick Pony, we've got this golden pony. So it's kind of this golden yellow color. So we always know where the pony is. In the war books, the color's always easy, right? My first book's a Revolutionary War book. How do we tell the soldiers apart? Well, some of them are gray and some of them are the red coats. So the color for that book is going to be red. Civil War story. What color we got the blue and the gray. So blue, that book's going to be blue. Donner Party is out in the woods. So we got to have green. World War I's going to have a lot of mud and trenches and awful stuff. So let's go with a brownish orange color that'll let us do all of that. Underground Railroad is going to take place at night. Let's go a deep dark purplish color. The Alamo, bright, sunny, yellow. So all of these colors just kind of play into it. I'm probably going to start repeating colors soon because I don't want to do a book that's all like, violet or neon blue. We'll probably start cycling back through these other colors because, I just want the color to tell the story, not to. We're going to run out of colors soon. My publisher publishes the Wimpy Kid books, Abrams, and have you noticed how they've been slowly running out of colors? I think they're coming up on book 10 or 11. And they are really starting to run out of colors. I'm not going to do that. I'll just cycle. I think once I go back to the Revolutionary War, we're going to go back to red. When I get back to another Civil War story, back to navy blue, and just on like that. The kids are always curious to know what the next color is. You can see what the color for this World War I book is going to be. It is this kind of blue, light blue, ocean/sky color. Oh, yeah.
How your major concern is how once you're drawing is how the story flows.
Yes.
And as I mentioned, I had actually read it in the in the preview copy, so I'm looking at your pencils and I read it that way and it flowed very, very well.
Oh, good.
I agree with you. So I guess my question here is since your editors are not comics people, right? They're book people,
yes,
and they're working with you at the story stage. At the drawing stage, are you pretty much left alone?
I really am. I have a lot of freedom when it comes to the drawing stage. In fact, sometimes I've had too much freedom, right? So the fact checker will go through and fact check my manuscript, but they don't fact check my drawings. And that's gotten us into a lot of trouble. I was doing a map for the end papers in my Civil War book showing, these are the Confederate states and these are the Union states. And I miscolored Kansas, right? In the early editions of my Civil War book, Kansas is a Confederate state. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Kansas, but their license plate says, Kansas, the free state, right? And I had just made them a Confederate state in the end papers of my book. This book had been out for about 3 days when I got an outraged email from a Kansas librarian that was just like, are you out of your mind? How can I take anything in this book serious? You just made my state a Confederate state. And it was just a mishap. Like I was selecting states and coloring them in. I just wasn't paying attention. This was at the very...
We're not moving either.
Oh, what's that?
Oh, weird. Yeah.
Hello? Did I lose you guys? Hello, hello? Hello?
Yeah, we froze up there for a second.
Oh, okay.
So hold on half a minute.
All right.
While Jordan does something here. All right. Are we moving now? Yes, we're moving. We can see him. Okay, great. So yeah, we left off with you got a letter from Kansas.
Right.
That was
got a letter from Kansas that the my maps were wrong. And people were furious. So now we do kind of a careful checking of the visuals as well. But as far as the visual style of the thing, they really just let me go to town. And Abrams has a great history with comics. They have Abrams Comics Arts, and they do a lot of great stuff. But they've given me a lot of freedom with this series. And some of the things that happen in the books are not in the manuscript. For example, in the Donner Party. And you're in California, right? You know all about the Donner Party. They're crossing over the Sierra Nevadas. They get stuck on the top of the mountain and people start dying. But since this is a cartoon for kids, I'm not going to show all kinds of dead bodies everywhere. It'd be really weird. In that whole book, you'll never see somebody like taking a bite out of somebody's arm or anything like this. It's not that kind of book. But how do I communicate this gruesome story in a way that leaves no questions, but that is a cartoon way? And that is, if you've read that book, you'll know that one of the characters in that book is the Grim Reaper, who starts appearing at the edges of their camp, and he gets closer and closer the more the starvation goes on. This was the kind of thing I learned reading lots of political cartoons growing up, is you can tell a true story in a comic book, but using kind of supernatural imagery. So this Grim Reaper would be appearing, and these characters would be far away, and the Grim Reaper would get closer and closer. And then towards the end of the book, when lots of characters are dying quite a bit, the Grim Reaper will appear in a panel at the end of the page. It never speaks. This is not a speaking character, but it'll just hold open its robe, and you will see the names of the members of the Donner Party that died that day. And it was a really cool graphic way to let the kids know what's happening in this book, but in a way that only comics could do, Yeah, no, comics have some neat tricks that you can communicate information really tight and really fast. Yep. Yeah, it's great too that you came to it late. I really like that, and that you've really done just a great job. You don't look like you've come to it late. You look like you've been doing comics your entire life. Oh, thank you. You've got a lot of books of history, and the One Trick Pony is your first non-history. Will there be more things like One Trick Pony in the future? Yes. Or was it a hard enough struggle with the manuscript to that it put you off it? No, absolutely. I'm going to keep doing more. What I'm learning more and more the further I get into comics is there's just nothing you can't do with this storytelling method. I mean, telling stories with little panels is great. To be able to do something as dry and boring as American history, and then a crazy science fiction story, all using the same format, it's really exciting. So I will continue doing Hazardous Tales. That series gets more and more popular with each book that comes out, which means the publishers want more of them. People ask me when I visit schools, how many Hazardous Tales books are you going to do? And I say, I'm going to do 100. Or at least I'm going to try. By the time I get to book 99, I'm sure we're going to be kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel for material. But I want to keep doing these. But I really enjoyed doing One Trick Pony. And depending on how well it sells, because that's something that will affect if the publisher lets me do another science fiction, fantasy, adventure type book, I'd like to do one of these every handful of history books. I got really lucky. There are a few history comics out there, but none that are super popular in middle grade readers. This is 3rd through 8th grade. Somehow I got really lucky and had a great publisher and a great editor, and we've put together a miracle, which is a series on history that young people actually want to read. So we're going to run with that as long as we can, because it's so miraculous that it happened. These kids are learning real American history, real facts, real research. All of this stuff on here is just too good to stop doing. That said, I got a story about like a haunted Taco Bell that I want to do. That's important too. Or, stories, great, weird, gross stories, haunted house stories. Actually, the kind of stuff I grew up reading. I did not grow up reading history books. I grew up reading science fiction and fantasy. And I would love doing more of those in a comic book form. One thing that it sometimes terrifies me, but they're, and I'm sure we could have a long back and forth fight over this, but so far there has not been the Harry Potter of comics, right? I mean, we could argue that maybe Smile and Sisters and the whole Raina Telgemeier thing, but that's not like Harry Potter. This is very successful memoir storytelling, super great, super fun, but it's not a whole world in 7 giant volumes that takes the entire world by storm. Maybe Bone. I mean, Bone's fantastic, but if you ask 10 out of 10 kids, 10 of them know what Harry Potter is. Maybe 6 of them know what Bone is. So I keep waiting to see, because I think it's going to appear in the next decade, the Harry Potter of kids comics, right? And that sometimes terrifies me. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll do the Harry Potter. No, I can't do it. Who's up for this task? Who's going to take on this thing that will completely take over? Because right now, if you spend much time in an elementary school or middle school library, you will know that the hottest shelf in the entire middle school or elementary school library is the graphic novel shelf. And there are tons. Publishers are just throwing everything at the wall to see what will stick. And for the last 10 years, it's been a lot of really interesting things. Bone has landed fantastic in there. Things like Baby Mouse. All these books that were never quite at home in a comics shop, but somehow are totally at home in a school library, are all kind of blowing up. And you've got this generation of kids coming up that has been reading more comics than the 3 or 4 previous generations ahead of them, because they are just devouring these comics in their school library. And these aren't, direct marketing, paper comics. These are graphic novels, which is almost a whole different thing. All of these kids are growing up and they're starting to create their own comics. And these comics that they are creating are crazy. And one of these readers is going to give us this Harry Potter of comics that's going to take over the universe and have a million movies and things like that. But the cool thing is, this little zone, the school library, is this fresh new space. It's not cluttered with a million.
We lost sound again.
Uh-oh, did you lose sound again? You got me now?
Just give me 1 second, sorry.
Yeah.
Right,
It's super exciting time for young comics readers, I think. I think for the last few years, kind of the main comic reader has been growing older and older. And a lot of the mainstream comics are kind of dodging kids, right? It seems like all through the 90s, it was like, comics are not for kids anymore. And now it's like, the kids are like, hey, where's the comics? We want the comics. And now they're coming right back. And this generation of kids is just getting swamped with great comics.
It's interesting because, I mean, speaking as a guy who owns a comic book store,
yes,
that is clearly a thing that has happened. Yeah. But the reason that the market moved away from comics for kids was because society as a whole thought that comics literally were only for children.
Right. Right.
I remember, the fastest way in the 90s to show that a character was subliterate in a movie was to have them with the comic book rolled up in their back pocket.
Oh, right.
And so I think it was a necessary move to make comics more adult. But boy, I'm really glad that they're back to being for kids, and hence why we do exactly this.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you very much, Nathan, for not only for doing the interview, but I want to thank you very much for One Trick Pony. We thought that this was a great book. I want to see you do more stuff like this. This was thrilling and exciting, and all the kids loved it. Yeah. Cool. And you guys all want to see more, right? Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Well, so do you think, Nathan, that you would ever do another story set in the same world, even though this is obviously a story that has a beginning, a middle, and end?
I've toyed with the idea, because here's the thing. They're down to Stone Age tools. All the metal comes crashing back to Earth. I mean, spoiler alert, but I guess you guys already finished it, right?
Yep.
The problem with all of this metal that comes crashing back to Earth is it's all like refined aluminum, high-tech metal. They no longer have all like the smelting. They don't longer have the technology to start over again, right? Because it's all been taken away. And then, and so if I do a story back in that universe, it would be like 1,000 years later or something. But there was something really fun about just one and done. Here's this world. Here's how it works. Here's what happened. The end. So I don't think I'll revisit. I don't think I'll revisit that world. I'm sure the longer, if I get away from it for a long time, I'll really want to go back and redo some of those drawings, make them look better. You know, kind of the George Lucas thing. I would like to go back and tinker with it and make it better. But I'm happy. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I'm really happy that it's found a home. I've got a lot of young readers that are really enjoying it. I've got a lot of adult readers that are enjoying it. We just got a really great book review from the Horn Book, which is the big literary children's book review site, and it's famously mean to books, and they loved it. They were really happy with it.
Yeah, no, it's a terrific book, and thank you so much for it. Give me screen back, Jordan.
Oh.
Yeah, no problems. I just want to say that the April book is Star Scouts by Mike Lawrence. Mike will be here Sunday, April 23rd, and I hope to see all of you guys back here for that. Mike will be in person, so we're going to have it back to another in-person person. And we already know what the book after that is, but I'm not going to tell you yet because that would be giving it away. So thank you for Nathan. Thank you all for coming out. And we'll see you next month with another Kids Club.
Thanks, everybody.